Hi guys, and welcome back to the layout, or in fact, just the branch line. Don't worry, the main layout's not gone anywhere. I'm pretty sure before I upload this video, I'm going to be uploading a video explaining the move and the fact that the branch line is now separate with me down where I live at work, and the main layout is still back with my parents. But yeah, I'm just back from Alexandra Palace, from the London Festival, and yeah, it was a really good day. These are some of the purchases I made. I actually bought a lot more wire, but some of that's already downstairs, and I'll explain why in just a second. But in today's video, I'm going to start wiring up this part of the layout. The first thing I need to do before I can start wiring the layout is get it tidied up. Okay, so I got the layout tidied up. You can see I've also precariously flipped it onto its back. I probably should have taken it to sections before I flipped it, but it was all right. And you can see we've got a lovely blank canvas ready to start wiring. So let's start with the bus wires. Okay, so you join me at my desk where I'm going to discuss some of my plans before I get started. Now, I've developed various systems over the years I've been building layouts, and you've probably seen those progress over time if you've been subscribing to my YouTube channel for a while. But the general basis I use, starting with the bus wires, is 24/02 or 32/02 cable. So that's talking about the number of strands at 0.2 millimeters of copper stranded wire. So yeah, I think this is a mix here of 2402 and 3202, and it's just called together, and these are going to form my main bus wires. So I've got red and brown will be my accessory bus, white and green will be my track bus, and yellow and blue will be my 12 volts bus. And this is a standard that I've got written down and organised, and the colour code is set, so I know exactly what every single wire means. Now, to get from these bus wires and into the actual track itself, we need some smaller gauge wire. So here I've got some 1602, so that's 16 strands of 0.2 millimeter copper, and again the colour code will match. On the point side I do have some 702, so slightly smaller wire, and that's just to make it easier to go into the DCC concepts point motors. Okay, so one of the first things to do will be to identify where I want the bus wire to run. You can see along here we've got the frog wires coming up for the points, which means there's a lot of track work going to be going on along here. So we want the bus wire nice and close to that, but without getting in the way. So I think, to be honest, we probably want it pretty much slap bang in the middle. I mean, the track comes down this way around here, if I just feel for it. Oh no, it's still up here. Yeah, so I think pretty much down the middle will work pretty well. Now, ordinarily, I'd run the wires through, you can see we've got these holes here. See, that's going to end up with the conduit sort of floating in mid-air. So I popped down to Wix today on my way back from Ali Pali, and I've got myself some new drill bits. I did have a set of these before, but this will be a much better set. And what I'm going to do is use the drill bit to put some new holes at the correct height all the way along the baseboard. Okay, so you can see I'm fixing the conduit in place, and literally just using these conduit clamps here, and they're working really, really well. Going to have to come down very slightly at the end here because there is a point motor that needs to go in here. And I've realised these holes that I've put between each board are probably going to be a bit small actually, for the size of the connector I want to put through them, but there's no worries there. I can always cut a bigger hole when I get round to putting those connectors on. But yeah, so it's literally as simple as splitting up the conduit clamp thing, screwing down the first side and then screwing the top on, and I think this is going to look really, really neat. We should be able to have dropper wires running into this on either side, however I want, whether that be from track, from point motors, or even lighting. And I'll just be able to run to this central conduit, and it should look, yeah, quite effective. Okay, so I've got the first couple of bits of conduit routed there, and I've just run through a single wire here that I'm going to use to pull the rest of the bus wires through. Now, hopefully this works. I just need a bit of persuasion. Perfect. here. Sweet. Now we have some bus wires. Just need to do the last board over there, and then I'll look at the connections between each board. Okay, so it's a little while later, and I'm getting closer to wrapping up for the evening. Probably going to chill and watch a film or something, because I left for London at about 7:30 this morning, and it's now 21:20, so yeah, we're getting on a bit in the evening. Right, to connect between the two baseboards though, this is the solution I've come up with. Bought these connectors from Halfords. I definitely don't have the correct tool for crimping them on, so what I've done is sort of crimp them on with pliers, and I've just soldered them for good measure. And all you need to do is slot it into the connector housing. You can see I've done this half already, and they just slot in like that. Now I'll slot on the other side, and they should go together. I've also just been drilling and filing out a nice slot that the connector fits through. It's a little bit chunky, but it's so much better than using pluggable terminal blocks. Yeah, and also those 24-pin connectors I've got do work really, really well, and I will keep using them on the rest of the layout. But they're just a bit excessive for the branch line that only needs 10 bus wires instead of up to 24 connections. Also, those 24-pin connectors need a custom PCB, and that costs money, and I have to wait for it to be ordered from China. So we proceed with the Halfords connectors. Okay, so it's actually Thursday evening, and I'm not long back from work, and I'm going to do a little bit more wiring. Now, I have been doing a few bits and bobs here and there before and after work, and you will have seen those if you follow my Instagram, at Horsey Railway Modeller. But I thought I'd just give you a bit of an update as to what I've done since I think the last clip you saw was probably on Sunday evening, if I remember correctly. So, major thing on this end, I've terminated the bus wire using one of my custom PCBs there. I had a couple of them left over from wiring the main layout. I've literally just got the track 12 volts and C-bus coming on this connector, and that allows me to use the standard connector I've got coming from my Merg controller down there. The accessory bus for now just terminates, as you can see, at that chocolate block there. If I need it for some sort of fiddle yard I'm going to have to build over here, I don't know. So for now it's just terminated. But this wire will go down to controller, and then any wiring that needs to go to the fiddle yard I'll work out. I think it'll just be really track. I'm thinking of having manual point control on it, to be honest. Not too sure. Coming down then, a major change you can see here is I've started installing, in fact I've almost finished installing, the Dapol semaphore signals. So this is the bottom of the junction signal. After asking around on Instagram as to where I should locate it, I decided on just before the bridge. I'll show you that properly in a minute when I've got the layout flipped back up. Literally just drill a hole, put the signal in, screw it down with the nut that goes on the bottom, and then mount this bottom unit on. It literally just clicks on. To provide some extra support, I had to cut out a piece of wood that was along here, and to provide some extra support I've just cut it and hot glued it in place there, and that holds this bottom box nice and firm. And you can see I've got the Train Tech DCC accessory decoder just glued in place there. For now it's got some temporary test wires on. The signal does indeed work, but I will be coming back and wiring that in properly. Now the reason I wanted to put that in is so I knew exactly where it's going to go. For a while I thought it was going to go in this area, but it's ended up over here, the other side of the river. And as I'll allude to in a minute, the next thing I want to be doing, which is why I started installing the signals, is getting the sort of major under baseboard circuitry and components installed in a place I know where they're going to be, and then I can drill holes for droppers, for example. This will be a prime location for droppers as there's not much going on here, and it's nice and close to the bus wire. Coming along then, you can see we've got another interboard connector. This is just a 6-pin here, and then I've got an 8-pin down there, and that's because this will have the bulk of the various lighting and accessories and stuff, and I might need to run some extra wires between these two boards, not too sure. You can see I've also got this next Dapol semaphore signal. This is one of their earlier ones, so it's just got the thin mount there, and there you can see it mounted on the top side. I will be coming back because this is quite noisy. I'm going to fit some cork or some rubber or foam underneath the threads here, see if I can quieten it down a bit. And then you can see I've also got the Train Tech DCC decoder in there, which for now is temporarily wired up and is just connected to the DCC Concepts Cobalt Sniffer, which is actually the next thing I want to mount. So as I said, I'm just working out where the major things go. So the signals take up some room underneath with their accessory decoders. Need to work out where I want to mount this, which will form the start of the accessory bus. And then I think I'll move on to mounting the point motors and wiring up the track. Okay, so I've got the DCC Concepts Alpha Sniffer just glued to the bottom of the baseboard there. I was using screws, but I've realised a lot of the screws I've been putting through the baseboard have been coming right out the other side. So I either need to buy some shorter screws or trim down the ones I've been using. Anyway, you can see I've got this coily wire running down here. That just runs up to the lever frame unit. I could have mounted this at the top, right next to the lever frame, but there's actually point motors and stuff that need to go in up here. And I wasn't quite sure where would be the most ideal location, so I put it down here, and it's time to wire it in. So for now, I've got a supply coming in from somewhere else, but I will be removing that, so that can come out. As I said, the coily cable, that's already in place, and I've got these two wires here, which are the output. Now I need to get these to connect to the bus wire. The great thing about the bus wire, there's no need to feed it from one end or the other or anything like that, so I'm just going to feed it right from the middle. So if I break open the cable wrap here, I'm hoping I should just be able to reveal, there we go, the brown and red wire like that. I'm then going to strip it back in two different locations, trying not to just break the wire. There we go, that's a nice strip there. And then one slightly further down. Perfect. Then I'm going to strip these back nice and long and get them wrapped around there. So what I'm going to be doing here is the same as what I've done on the storage yard, which is just soldering onto the bus wire, because it just works, to be honest. In the past I've used various types of connector, which do work very well. They're plug and play, they mean you don't need to use a soldering iron. But they just, for one, add expense, and for two, they make your bus wire quite messy if you've got lots of these connectors about, particularly if you end up cutting off some wires and you've still got the connectors there. But now you can see that was really quick and effective. Now what I've got to do is come back and solder these, then I'll put on something called liquid electrical tape, which will insulate it, and I'll tuck it back into the cable management there. Okay, so as you can see, that's the Cobalt Sniffer installed. So we've got the output wires coming up to the bus wire and soldered in place, and now it's nicely tucked away, and it just comes out there, and it looks quite neat, I'm sure you can agree. And then what you haven't seen is on this side, I've got 12 volts coming from the 12-volt bus down to this little adapter connector board and into the sniffer. So that means my accessory bus is now live. Once again, I'm skipping ahead slightly, and I've got some Cobalt point motors installed. Now the reason I've skipped ahead, for one, is because I was doing this after work yesterday. So it's now Saturday morning, and I installed these point motors across Thursday and Friday after work, but also because it's been shown hundreds of times on various different YouTube channels how to install these. So yeah, I replaced the sticky pads because I'd previously used my point motors, obviously, replaced them with new sticky pads on the bottom, used the pads to line them up, and then I've put a screw diagonally either side. And here you can see I've just got some 1602 wire, actually no, this is 702 wire, going back to this nice terminal board up here. We've then got some 2402, some big bus wire cable just coming down, and again soldering on to the bus wire. So that means I've got from this sort of chocolate block here, I've got 5 Cobalt point motors wired in. I've then also got the signal wired in. You see just coming up here, going back to that terminal block. Panning further down, I've just soldered the bracket signal, the junction signal, directly to the bus wire. So you can see the wire comes down from the decoder there and into the bus wire. And then looking the other way, I've got 2 more points that need wiring up, and I'm going to do it in exactly the same way that I've done the rest of them. One of the main reasons I've put the point motors in first is because they take up a reasonable amount of space underneath the baseboard, and also their positioning sort of tells me where I need to put the terminal blocks that feed them. Having done that, I can now see I've got an empty bit of baseboard down here, perfect for adding dropper wires. Also, not much going on at the other end. Again, perfect for adding dropper wires. So I'm going to proceed to do this on the sort of rest of the boards, trying to get all of the accessory stuff wired in that needs to go in. So most notably, the point motors down there. And then I'm going to start adding dropper wires and getting the track wired up. Okay, so you joined me immediately doing something completely different to what I said I was about to do. So I think I said I was going to continue wiring up all the accessory bus and the point motors down at that end of the layout. But what I've actually started doing is the track, because I've realised I'm not going to have enough of these sort of full-size terminal blocks to do everything I want to do with them. So I bought some slightly smaller ones, so I've got to wait for those to arrive. The reason I bought some smaller ones is, for example, over here I've not quite filled up this whole terminal block. I will be using a couple more. I'm not going to take that one out because that's in place, that's glued in and everything, but to avoid that in the future, I'm going to get a smaller one to go here, for example, where there's not as many tracks that need to go in, and down there's only 2 point motors that need to go in, so I don't really need a full strip of 12, and that leaves my full strip of 12 terminals. For example, one needs to go in here, and that will be for the track feeds. So what I've started to do is put in some dropper wires. I've already put, there's droppers in on this track and this track, soldered directly to the bus wire, and that's because, well, it was only 4 wires, so there's no real need to add a terminal block or anything. But over here, I've got this set of droppers here, so one on each track. Then each of the point motors needs a track feed for the frog polarity switch. So all in all, I think it's 7 or 8 connections on each polarity. So 7 or 8 connections to the white and 7 or 8 connections to the green. So that's going to go back to a terminal block there. And then to feed the terminal block, I've got some more wire soldered into the bus wire. Again, I'll insulate that and hide it away nicely in the thing. And that'll come up there and feed a terminal block. Okay, so it's actually Tuesday evening after work, and a lot of wiring got done over the weekend. So you can see I've got that main track feed in there where I said I'd put it, wire coming up from the bus wire, and then the droppers going off to the tracks down here, and then to each individual point motor where they switch a feed that goes back to the frog. Yeah, nothing more to it really. It's just a case of doing sort of one wire at a time. And then if we come down to the one end, you see I've got another terminal block, and that's again just all the track feeds at the end there. I've tried to keep it nice and tidy using these little P-clips as I've gone along, and then I've also been coming along and adding in some hot glue on some of the wires as well. Something else you'll notice is these feet here in various locations, and that is because when I started using these point motors, I had in my head that they worked perfectly on West Canal sidings, my old university layout, and that had, I think it was a 75mm deep baseboard, can't remember off the top of my head, but exactly the same depth as whatever this is, and in my head it worked perfectly. But I've come to discover, the exact same as I discovered on West Canal sidings, that these point motors actually do protrude past the bottom of the baseboard, only by a couple of millimetres, and I've resolved this by buying these felt feet from B&Q. Now, of course, this won't be an issue when the layout is slotted back in above the storage yard of the main layout, because it nestles nicely on supports, And these point motors are sort of free to dangle underneath the layout as much as they want without interfering with anything. However, if I'm putting this baseboard on top of a table or on top of supports like I've got it on at the moment in the spare bedroom, I need these feet just to make sure these point motors get clearance. So yeah, just went to B&Q, picked these up, a couple quid for a pack, and they work very, very well. Now the reason that section of the layout was on the floor is because I've got this section here, which is the final section, the end board, the station board, up, and I'm just currently doing some wiring. Again, it's Tuesday evening after work, and I thought I'd get a little bit of progress done. So you can see my smaller terminal blocks have arrived, and it just means these 2-point motors are on a much smaller terminal block, saves me wasting some of the larger 12 section ones, and that's got some room left over anyway to add the accessory decoders for the lighting and things like that. Again, try to keep it as neat as possible. I've got this 702 wire running to the feeds for the point motor. I've then got this orange wire, which is the frog wire. That comes from the frog of the point and through to the middle of the switch. So I just need to follow up and do the same as I have done on the other sections of the layout, which is get some green and white 1602 wire. That needs to go to either side of the switch that switches the frog, and this can be fed back to either that bus bar there, which has got track power on it, or in extremis it can go to that bus bar there, which has got track power on it, and that will feed the points, and that will be the points all done. And then of course I've got I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 droppers to do down this end, and 4 droppers to do down this end, and that will be the track and points completely wired up, ready for a good test. And that's kind of what I want to get done this evening before I go get some food. Okay, so it's about a week later. I'm actually just on my lunch break away from work, and I thought I'd just show you that the wiring is pretty much complete. So I've got up to a few things over the past couple of days, over the weekend. Forget what day it is there, I think it's a Wednesday. I've done some stuff after work the past couple of days, and it's now all done. So starting at the very end, we've got the end of the bus wire there, the track feeder, nicely labelled up there, with some dropper wires. Coming down, you can see the point motors all wired up to the accessory bus there on that shorter terminal block I was talking about. And again, we've got track feeds going off, the frog's live, and the switches are powered by the accessory bus, as I just said. Got lighting here, so this is something I've done that you've not seen yet on camera. I've got the Uhlenbrock SD1s and SD2s, so they are switched on address number 4, as you can see there, and that allows me to turn the lighting on and off. You can see I've just got some wooden Scenics lamps, yard lamps, running back up there with a nice solder tag in the middle before it goes back to the bus wire. More track droppers. We've then got that 8-pin connector there, or 6-pin connector, and you've seen most of this before. Got track droppers going back to a track bus. This is something else that's new, a C-bus cable. I've got just a pluggable terminal block on there that I can't seem to get out. There you go, pluggable terminal block, like so, in case I need to put it onto the next board. I can't think why I would. The main reason for the C-bus is to give me my controller network. I've only got the one socket, because I only need the one. And I was trying to put the second socket on and I was having issues with it for some reason, but if I just put the one socket, it worked. No idea why. Something to do with Merg. Probably should have read something better. But yeah, so the main reason for this C-bus is to provide the controller throttle there. However, if I want to extend it, if I do want to add perhaps track feedback circuits or something, I don't know if I will or not, but then I've got the bus wire available. You can see it's the twisted wire here. Again, down here, my DCC Concepts Cobalt Alpha Sniffer. I actually managed to blow up the voltage regulator on this. I was swapping the 12-volt bus wires around. Basically, those Woodland Scenics lamps didn't come on because the polarity seemed to be reversed for some reason. So I just swapped around my 12-volt bus wires down at the transformer. The lights came on, and this went pop. So this is not polarity protected. What I've done though is I've soldered on a brand new voltage regulator, which fixed that, and actually worked out the Woodland Scenics lights. You can see I've got black and grey here, and then grey and black there. I actually swapped it on this solder tag, so I've just swapped these around here. Everything's working again, no dramas. Okay, more point motors, obviously bus wires running through the conduit here. We've got the signal DCC decoder, another lighting section there that's switched. Track bus, accessory bus, Again, I tried to keep it as neat as possible. Sorry, slip of the tongue there. And then I've got more bus wires going back that way. Just quickly on the bus wires, the reason they're going back to these terminal strips like so is, again, if I want to add feedback, it's just a case of taking off this cover. I can then also just take off this sort of bridging bar here, and then I can just run the dropper wires back to some sort of, well, it'll be a DTC 8A from Merg to do block detection, and that'll be what that's like that. I think I've shown you this before. Accessory bus wire goes down here, it goes up to the top and actually runs to the Mimic panel on, actually you can just see it there, an XT60 plug socket in the top of the canopy there. Moving on, we've got another baseboard join. Here the C-bus is temporarily on some pluggable terminal blocks. I do actually have one of these connectors left over, but it's a 4-pin, so I'll be using that to connect that there. Another switch lighting section, some track droppers, accessory bus going to that. C-bus comes down the bottom. Signal there, it's a junction signal from Dapol with the Train Tech decoder. And then finally, bus wires terminate with my custom PCB and connector and come down to my custom Merg controller. Just to give you a quick tour of the controls then, we've got my nice control box with the lever frame here, which still needs some work doing to it. You can see overall we've got the lights in the one corner, so I can turn the main lighting on and off. That's on one of those DCC relays. And on the other DCC relay, or in fact 3 of them, so there's a switch section on each board, we have the lights, which at the moment just turns on those Woolen Scenic lamps, but will eventually turn on all of the lighting in various buildings. And there's scope to add more buttons with different addresses or whatever, if I wanted to turn lights on and off individually with those various relay sections. Obviously, the lever frame itself controls the points with my nice DCC Concepts motors. They're a bit loud, but they work quite well. In the corner of the screen there, you can see I've got a Dappol semaphore signal. This one needs a new ladder, but I will be replacing the ladder with a brass one anyway. You can see that works nicely, again, with the lever frame. On top of the layout, I've got the nice Mimic panel that you'll have seen in the previous video, if I've got around to editing that. And you can see if I turn on panel indication, and then move the various things around, so that should be changing. There we go. See that signal on green, or if I change one of the points, for example. And you can see we've got the lights coming on and off in the corner there. There we go. All the indication seems to be working. So yeah, overall, very happy with the progress that has been made. You see in the background, I've also spray painted the track, but I'm sure I'll probably put some of this stuff into a sort of more generic layout update. You see the high street's making progress. Again, that'll probably be in a layout update. Got some locos stacked up down there, ready for a bit of a running session. Yeah, I'll see you in the next one.